Tonight's episode of the Masonic Roundtable is brought to you by our good friends at Masonic Revival. This just in, it's actually quite exciting. As of today, Brother Edgar and our good friends at Masonic Revival have just introduced a brand new York Rite apron collection. So that includes a lot of the Royal Arch and High Priest aprons that we will most likely talk about tonight. And before we get into the episode, we just wanted to talk a little bit about how awesome Brother Edgar is and how awesome his aprons are. If we switch back over to John and Brother Joe, I know you all actually have some York Rite aprons that Edgar has done for you.
That's right. Joe, I'll let you go first if you want to hop in on it. Do you have yours at the ready?
I do.
So in addition to these nice mass-produced York Rite aprons, which I was surprised about the price, Edgar also does custom. Hold that up a little bit longer, Joe.
You don't like my face?
Yes.
It's a market improvement.
Can you do that for the rest of the show? That'd be great.
Yes. Don't let your arms get tired.
And mine's all buried in my case, but I'll show that later on tonight. So yeah, great custom aprons as well. If you want to have a custom past high priest apron for all of your past high priests, it makes a good gift.
Isn't it time for a Masonic Revival, John?
I'd say so. Okay, welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, you can send questions and comments to the Facebook event page for High Priest Regalia, episode 252, or in the chat running alongside this YouTube video. So welcome to all of our live event page viewers for High Priest Regalia. So welcome to all of you watching live. My name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. Next up for introductions, we have Robert Johnson. Say hi, Robert.
Hello, Robert Johnson, past master Waukegan Lodge 78, Waukegan, Illinois, current sitting secretary of Good New Hope, Space Novum Lodge 1183, UD in Libertyville, Illinois.
At least it's not big time.
Well, we are big time.
As Nick used to say, big time.
Good old is reserved for Clifton, Virginia.
Yeah, good old is Clifton, Virginia. We are New Hope.
Very nice. Awesome. Next up, Jason Richards.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Jason Richards here, past master of Acacia Lodge number 16 in good old Clifton, Virginia, and member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in the timeless Washington District of Columbia.
Yeehaw, good old. And last but not least, special guest tonight, the one, the only, Joe Martinez.
He is probably not the only Joe Martinez out there.
Jose.
I am the most handsome, so we can start there.
You're the only Joe Martinez we care about.
There you go. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Joe Martinez. I am the junior warden of Manassas Lodge number 182 in Manassas, Virginia. I'm also a member of Ezekiel Bates Lodge in Attleboro, Massachusetts, the home of the ever-popular Masonicon, which is coming up soon. And member of lots of other bodies, which I'm not going to mention because my wife is probably watching. So she doesn't need to know how many dues I'm paying. So thanks for having me.
In case you're wondering, they're all free. So good stuff. Thank you for joining us, Joe. I stumbled upon Joe's presentation through our Grand Chapter website. And so I reached right out to him, being the man who put it all together, and said, why don't you come on over? But before we dive into that, I do want to give a shout out to the patrons who've been supporting the show for our pages, squires, and knights. There's the different levels of what you can support the show. It's really been a big benefit in getting our hosting fees covered, some new equipment, and getting us set up for some really cool things for the rest of the year, to include being present at Masonicon in Attleboro and Esotericon in Manassas, Virginia. So two big things to look forward to this year. So thank you to our patrons, of which I know Brother Martinez is one of the knights. Is that correct? Yes. Maybe not. It's free, of course, for Joe.
And hey, if you're coming up to Masonicon, come swing by our table. TMR is gonna have a table there, I assume, and we might have some special stuff that you can get that you can't get anywhere else.
If you're vague on YouTube, it's not called vague booking. It's like
It's not
vague,
called it's vague YouTubing.
vague tubing. Then that's just a different dark place. Let's get right into tonight's topic, which is on the high priest regalia. Now, first, why are we talking about biblical high priest regalia, and what does it have to do with Freemasonry?
It was part of the original Illuminati.
Right.
And
All the way back.
Adam Weishaupt actually invented the term high priest, which
No, Joe Wages would probably have a good reason for that, and the exact date and time and what they were drinking. But for now, Joe, why are we talking about the high priest and his garments or regalia?
Well, number one, because you asked me to, and number two, it is a good place to get into a lot of the symbolism and the meaning in Royal Arch Masonry.
The Royal Arch thing.
It is indeed. It is part of the Grand Council. So the dudes that sit up in the front at a Royal Arch meeting, and they're different in different jurisdictions. The United States does it a lot differently than the UK and Ireland, and but it's a very prominent figure in the Bible, and it is a good place to have an interesting conversation about, like I said, Royal Arch.
Right. So if you're not a Royal Arch member yet, or for those who aren't even Masons, we do have the heads of the bodies, right? We have what would be the equivalent to the president that runs that local body of organization. And so in the Blue Lodge, the topmost person is called the Worshipful Master. And when you join appendant bodies after becoming a third-degree Master Mason, you can choose to join all these other appendant bodies of Royal Arch or Scottish Rite or a whole bunch of different things. When you join the York Rite line, you will get to a body called the Royal Arch. And in that organization, the guy who runs the show is dubbed the high priest and will have garment or have at least regalia that resembles some of the regalia that Joe's going to talk about tonight. So once we get into where this comes from, can you talk about where in the Bible this regalia is referenced, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify one point, we're going to talk about American Royal Arch Masonry today. And a little side note for our international friends who are watching tonight. In the United States, the head of the body is the high priest. In pretty much everywhere else in the world, the head of the body is the king. But if you haven't noticed, here in the United States, we don't like monarchies very much. So as a result, we've removed the king as the head of a Royal Arch body, and we've made him the high priest. So again, we're going to focus on the high priest this evening. But to answer your question, it's talked about in a bunch of places in the book of Exodus and also in Leviticus. We have Exodus 28 and Exodus 39 and Leviticus 8, I believe it is, that go over in a lot of detail. I mean, there are entire chapters in the Old Testament that talk just about the garments of the high priest.
So would you like to walk through your presentation? Because I know you have some visuals that go along with this that will definitely help for those who are following along in the YouTube.
Sure, absolutely.
So Jason, roll that beautiful bean footage. There we go. Hopefully you should see that.
The secret family recipe is... Oh, wrong show.
Okay, it's all yours, Joe. Why don't you take that away?
Cool. Well, I can see it. I'm new to YouTubing.
Joe, before we get started, I got to ask, is there any slide in this deck that shows us Indiana Jones?
No.
Well, there's always room for improvement.
Well, that's it.
Tune in next week.
Yes.
Version 2. Yes.
JK.
Mea culpa.
Funny stuff.
All right, I'm for real now.
Let's
Zoned in.
Excellent. Well, I don't want to PowerPoint people to death, so we can run through these pretty quickly. So move past the title there, young man. Do I control them or does Jason control them?
Jason's got it. There we go. You want to go one more, Joe?
Oh, I can't see it.
Oh, well, click on the little picture down the bottom.
Oh, snap. Look at that.
Wow.
Technology. It's amazing.
This is
yeah.
why we didn't want to bring you on the show, Joe.
Well, and this will be the last time, I
Hey.
guess. Well, I covered all this. This is the intro slide, so we can move on. And then, so again, like we said, we're going to talk about Royal Arch Masonry, specifically the High Priest in the United States. Can any of you illustrious guests tell me what that symbol is inside that triangle?
It's a bathtub.
That looks like a Pope's hat.
Yeah,
Yes, it has a name, right? That's called a mitre.
that's it.
So yes, so depending on which
Tight.
version of the Bible you read, sometimes it's called a mitznefet in Hebrew, and sometimes in the King James version, it's called a mitre. So the high priest of Israel wore a mitre, which is what is worn by Catholic bishops and other Christian
High priest.
heads, high priests. Yes, indeed. So that's where it comes from. Next slide. And this was just a trivia question to keep people awake inside the chapter. And again, we just touched on outside of the United States, the king is the head of the body. But in the United States, the high priest is the one in charge because we don't like kings and we don't like queens. Next slide. So in the United Kingdom, the symbol for the person in charge is a crown, obviously. And he is called the Most Excellent Zerubbabel. Okay, so Zerubbabel is the person in charge in UK Royal Arch bodies.
Is Zerubbabel also the one who is let go by Babylonia, the king of Babylon, to rebuild?
He is indeed.
Okay. That's cool.
Yep.
Thanks.
One and the same.
Yep. And I mean, you touch on an interesting point. Depending on which country you're in, whether it's Ireland or the United States or Canada and the UK, and I think you had Don McAndrews on a few years ago to talk about this. There is a different story in each of these bodies, and they all kind of talk about the same central point, most times about the rebuilding of the Second Temple. And he is a prominent figure in the Bible when it comes to the end of the exile and the return to Jerusalem.
Jason, we lost the slides. Probably by design. That's what you get for multitasking. Wait for it.
I just like staring.
And we can't hear Jason, so
Yeah,
he's
this is
talking
great.
to nobody.
This makes for great live shows.
You want to bring the apron back up?
There we go. Okay, let's get back to it. Most Excellent Zerubbabel.
So,
A live show, folks. Sorry.
hello. So, just to give a shout out to John Bridegroom. That is his past high priest jewel that I've seen lots of people wear. He does amazing work, and his site is it the Master's Craft? Is that right? So I'll throw a shout out to him.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the high priest, when he is in office, his symbol is a mitre. But once he becomes a past high priest, once he's already served, he actually has a different symbol, which is very, very different. And this is going to segue really nicely into the garments of the high priest in Israel at the time where, they were the figurehead in the temple throughout that course in history. So the symbol of a past high priest, which we showed on our aprons, and I'll grab it again, is, you can see it, it's that breastplate. And the breastplate was a really important part of the garments of the high priest, so much so that it takes up a really big part of the Bible. And the garments themselves are described to Moses in Exodus 29, and then almost identically, they're spoken about again as they're being made in Exodus 39, and then they get described one more time in Leviticus 8 when they're being put on Aaron, when Moses is anointing him as the first high priest of Israel. But they don't use the term high priest, they use great priest. And the word high priest shows up later in the Bible. But it's a very elaborate garment, a lot of meaning, a lot of symbolism, some things we won't get into tonight. But it's very elaborate and it's very well described in detail, so much so that, like I said, it takes up 3 entire chapters in the Bible. Well, that was not in my presentation, but that is awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jason for the win.
Yes.
I
So
lost the slides on purpose.
you just totally threw me off my game, but I'm gonna roll with it. But
We'll do it live.
yes. So who was the high priest? So the first high priest of Israel was Aaron, Moses' brother. And he is named as such in Exodus 28. Aaron did have a lot of sons. So the way it's talked about in Exodus 28 was it was supposed to be a patrilineal line, meaning it was supposed to go from father to son through Aaron with his son Eleazar. So the first few high priests of Israel were father to son, and they went from Aaron to Eleazar to Phinehas to Abishua to Buki to Uzi. And then at some point, the high priest of Israel stopped being patrilineal from the line of Eleazar and started with the younger brother Ithamar. And there were high priests that were part of that patrilineal line. So it was supposed to be Eleazar the entire time. And there's a lot of intrigues and stuff going on. If you read the story about how, Solomon became king and all the drama that was surrounded around that, you'll see that there was a lot of soap opera like drama in who was getting chosen to be high priest. But
it seems like, Joe, I remember there was a degree where I watched, and I can't remember what rite it was, but essentially Solomon and then all of these other dudes are gonna be king, but David chooses Solomon for whatever reason, and he's like, all his brothers are not thinking it's going to be Solomon.
I remember, wasn't it Absalom who was kind of pissed about that?
That rings a bell. Yeah.
Got his hair caught in a tree. Very sad.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I believe it was Adonijah who was the one who thought he was going to be king, right? And because you got to remember, Solomon his mom was Bathsheba, right? And there was a lot of drama around that. And, and David's first child with her died, and Solomon was the second child. And so he was kind of looked at as an illegitimate child. Then you had Adonijah and a whole bunch of other brothers who all died at some point. He thought he was the heir apparent to the throne. And he did try to start a coup, as David was sitting there being old and getting ready to die. But that's where we segue right back into the high priest story, because at the time where David was about to pass his title on to one of his sons, there were 2 high priests. There was Abiathar and there was Zadok. And I'm sure you guys have heard that name before. So Abiathar sided with Adonijah. He thought he was going to be the one that was chosen to become the king of Israel. And Zadok sided with Solomon. And actually, I think in the next slide, there's a 15th century painting. Oh no, this is the story I'm telling you right now. So yeah, there it is. Zadok actually anoints Solomon once David gives his blessing and anoints him king of Israel. And then, you know, Adonijah gets forgiven, and then he gets stupid, tries to take over the throne, and then Solomon has him killed, and that's the end of that story. But now you start the line of Zadok, and if you look at the Bible and if you look at the works of Josephus, you'll see that Zadok was of patrilineal descent to Eleazar. So the high priest of Israel goes back to its original patrilineal line, and it, I mean, it's referred to as the Zadokite dynasty for the longest period of time. You'll have high priests from the line of Zadok, the original Aaronic line, all the way back to Aaron, and that carries on pretty much until the Hellenization of Judea. Oh, I will keep going.
Established lineage.
Yes. So, so when we get to Zadok, we're still in the First Temple period, and there were subsequent high priests. And then, as everyone knows, the temple was destroyed, and the Jews were taken into captivity into Babylon. And upon Zerubbabel, upon his return, he set up, started rebuilding a second temple and set up the council as it was set up originally. And Joshua was the first high priest upon return. And he was high priest during those time frames. And there are different Masonic degrees that get into that and talk about this story. And again, depending on which country you receive those degrees, they're a little bit different. So then we get through, and again, Joshua was of the line of Zadok. So you still have that same familial descent. And then, right up until about 160, 150 BCE, it just gets totally weird. You just have people that are chosen high priest, like an election, and you have the Seleucids, and then the Maccabeans. They're putting people in as high priest.
So it's kind of like the Royal Arch today.
Indeed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm relatively certain though the Royal Arch of today
had more dried chicken for dinner.
I had a joke, but I'm gonna go with that. Yeah, definitely.
Joe, please continue.
Oh,
Before Robert so rudely interrupted you.
You totally have thrown me off with that Indiana Jones slide. I'm still thinking about that because that was phenomenal. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to wrap this up, and you're bringing it back, aren't you? Damn it. Yes.
Nice.
So just as a segue, in the book of Exodus, there is no face melting in either of those chapters. So we're just going to stick with the garments. So, but last thing about the lineage was the last documented high priest of Israel was Phineas ben Samuel, and he died when Herod's temple was destroyed during the revolt. So he was the last one. But again, by that time, it was a weird political figurehead position because you had the Sanhedrin. There was a bunch of high priests that, ruled as a council as opposed to a single figure like Aaron or Zadok or Joshua. Right.
This is the raising that happens like around 70 CE, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just want to make sure I have my dates right. Thanks, Joe.
Yep. So now let's talk about the garments, which are so well described in the Old Testament. So there's 5 big parts to the high priest garments. There's the white under tunic, there's the blue robe, there's the ephod, and we'll get into what that is, the breastplate, and the mitre or mitzvah. So next slide. I don't know where I found that picture. I just searched for white tunic, but he is a very dapper man.
They looked exactly like that back in the day.
I did when I had hair, yes. So the big thing about the white tunic, it is the undermost garment, and it must cover the body as much as possible, and in Exodus 28, as you can see, it says, he must wear them whenever they enter the tent of meeting or approach the altar to minister in the holy place, so that they will not incur guilt and die. And not only Aaron had to wear the white tunic, his sons, who were sub high priests or sub priests, they also had to wear white tunics. So the undermost garment was that white tunic.
So another point to add is that any of the religious garb was really worn only in the temple and only for ceremonial purposes, right? So when they're outside, when they're not preaching, they're mixing around, they're wearing regular clothes with they're living in the tents with the community. So there is no separation of appearance when they're off duty per se. So all these apply, not just for the white tunic, but everything else.
And so also, I'm just curious, Joe, maybe you know, or maybe you've looked into this. If not, maybe we have some Hebrew scholars that'll let us know. My general question is, as with any translations that go from in biblical text anyway, we have Greek essentially to the Latin and into English, and we lose some things, and some words are used when they shouldn't have been, that kind of thing. And we have examples. I think, what is it, like 6,000 different examples of this. But I'm wondering, when they say so that they will not incur guilt and die, if the word guilt, because it feels right in terms of purification, mind, body, spirit kind of thing. But I'm curious if it has another meaning, if the word guilt that is used right now means something else, or was translated differently, or could mean something else. If anybody knows, let me know. I'm just curious.
Well, no, I haven't, but you bring up an awesome point, which we'll actually touch on later in the presentation, where there's, if you take the King James Version of the Bible and you take like the New International Version of the Bible, there is completely different words being used, just in these 2 chapters alone, that really change the way stuff is described in Royal Arch Masonry, just from those 2 different versions of the Bible.
I'm doing some research right now to find out.
So I will keep talking. So next slide. So the blue robe. So the robe, the blue robe is Exodus describes it as a single piece of cloth with an opening for the head, and that it has to have a woven edge around the collar so that it will not tear. And there is a lot of symbolism to people tearing their garments in the Bible. But this blue robe that covers the pure white undergarment has to have a woven collar so they won't tear.
So looked up some fun fact in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses.
Sweet, yeah, I got it right over there
on
my shelf.
At the ready, so that they do not bear guilt and die. The phrase used pointedly puns on bear off guilt in verse 38. In the first instance, the idiom means to remove guilt. Here, antithetically, it means to bear the onus of guilt. Even the golden diadem engraved with the divine name would not protect the priest from harm if he were to violate the sanctity of the tabernacle by exposing his sexual parts as he performed his priestly functions. So cover up or get out.
That's fascinating, actually. Tangentially, we'll save it for later.
Well, to your point, Robert, you glossed over the part where, before they put all this stuff on, there was a huge ritual of purification and washing and rewashing and, getting made perfect before you put on all this stuff and did your stuff inside the Holy of Holies. So. Next slide. That's my amazing PowerPoint skills. So one of my favorite parts is, and you skipped it. So on the blue robe,
Yeah.
Exodus, I know John's chomping at the bit to talk about this. So on the blue robe, there were pomegranates and there were gold bells. And the pomegranates were made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. And there were also gold bells in between the pomegranates, and they had to be worn on the blue robe, and so that you can hear the person and see the person that was wearing them. And Exodus 28 says, the sound of the bells will be heard when he enters the holy place before the Lord and when he comes out, so that he will not die. Because you can't sneak up on God. So you got to be seen and heard. And so basically the people that are not inside the Holy of Holies know that you're still alive, that God has not killed you. And I know John wanted to say something about the pomegranates as well.
Well, in general, I mean, we did a whole show on the symbolism of the pomegranates, and so there's a lot of Talmudic interpretations of the pomegranate, not only as a symbol of the Kabbalah, but also of of wisdom. And in some interpretations, I've only found one source, so I need to kind of back that up with a couple other sources, that because the pomegranates were used in the 3 different colors of thread, blue, red, and scarlet, which are important for Royal Arch Masons. And then there's other thread, like gold thread, used in the vestments, that the 4 threads do represent a Kabbalistic sense of the 4 worlds. So it's layers upon layers of not just the ornamental, the visual, but then the symbolic point of why pomegranates, for the high priest.
Well, like you said, I mean, you could talk about the symbolism behind pomegranates for hours upon hours, but I will not. But next slide. So again, the important thing with the bells was, the commoners, not the high priest, who was the only person that could go inside the Holy of Holies. He could be in there for hours upon hours upon hours. So they needed to know that he was still alive. So, hearing those gold bells, they knew that, God wasn't angry and didn't strike him down. But now we get into the ephod. So the ephod is basically the colorful suit that goes over the blue robe, which includes the breastplate, which we'll talk about. And again, this ephod is made of gold and blue and purple and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen. And that it had to have 2 shoulder pieces up on the shoulder. I don't think I have a really good picture of that. But up on the 2 shoulders, there are woven patches, and on top of those are black stones. Next slide. And again, my awesome PowerPoint skills. Next slide. Back one, sorry. So there's 2 onyx stones, and you can go on YouTube and search for ephod. You'll see tons of videos about the people that have made high priest garments, and they're amazingly well done. But on these 2 onyx stones were the 12 tribes of Israel, the sons of Israel, in the order of their birth. So there were 6 names on one stone and 6 names on the other. And then they acted as basically shoulder pads for holding the breastplate over the ephod. And we'll get into the breastplate last. But again, it was woven and had the 2 onyx stones, and on his shoulders, the high priest bore the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So symbolic and literal as well. Next.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating too, some of my research, that it's kind of interesting when you think about, the lineage of Abraham, and you're like almost literally carrying the weight of all of the descendants and all the tribes into the holy place with you. So it is an external remembrance of what you're here to do as the high priest. And I liken it to the way that that we wear, for example, for we as Masons wear Masonic rings and stuff like that, not for us necessarily, but to let other people know this is what we represent, and also to kind of subdue our own passions. but keep everything remembering why we're doing it and for whom.
Yep. So here is where we're going to talk about
Street Fighter 2.
Yes. Indiana Jones. But here we're going to talk about the mitre. And I like the word mitre better because it does have a much more meaning, especially when you see it used later in other religious institutions. But here's what we were talking about before. In the New International Version of the Bible, it says, "Make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it, as on a seal, holy to the Lord." If you read the King James Version of the Bible, it says, "Holiness to the Lord," which for Royal Archmasons, that has a lot of cool meaning. But yeah, you lose something with different translations of the Bible. And again, one word can mean something to one person and not to another. But again, we're talking about this mitre, and it's basically a turban that has a blue sash, and there's a gold plate that he ties around the turban. And it has to be on his forehead continually so that it's pleasing to the Lord. Next slide.
So obviously it's points out. That's what I'm getting.
Points out, yes. And again, I don't know where I got that picture. That is a terrible version. So now we're going to talk about the breastplate. So the most symbolic piece when it comes to a past high priest is the breastplate. And the breastplate, it had two meanings. The first meaning was, the literal part of it was, again, made of fabric of blue and gold and purple and scarlet. And then it had this gold plate that held 12 stones. And it was worn over the breast of the high priest. And it was attached, to those shoulder pads with the onyx stones. Next slide. So trying to find out exactly why each stone was chosen. I tried to do some research on that. I couldn't find exactly why. One thing I did see was a rabbi on YouTube. I'll send you guys the link. He actually said that the banners of the 12 tribes of Israel had the same colors as the stones that they're talking about in Exodus 28. And that's why those stones were chosen to represent the 12 tribes. But on this breastplate, just like on the onyx stones, are the names of the 12 sons of Israel, or 12 tribes. And he would wear this over his breast because it was the breastplate of judgment. So he wanted to represent all of the 12 tribes when the high priest was going into the temple to make a decision or to get a decision from God. And the way that was done was probably in the next slide. So I just noticed I have a typo. It's so inside that breastplate of judgment was two stones, an Urim and a Thummim. That should actually be an M. And I actually have some examples that I showed when I do this presentation live. But basically inside the breastplate is a pouch, and there were these two stones. And no one really exactly knows what those stones meant. There's a lot of speculation. One said yes, one said no. One would actually glow or incandesce to give you the right answer. So people have said many different things about what exactly those stones did, but they were in a pouch. They were identical in shape and weight. And the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies and ask God for, are we going to win this battle, or is it okay to, sleep with my best friend's wife and, then have him killed later. Whatever was asked of God, the high priest would put his hands inside the pouch inside the breastplate and pull out the answer that God had wanted to provide to the high priest. That was the purpose of those two stones.
Yeah, which I find fascinating too. With it's one of the few instances of like casting lots and divination in the Bible. So when you hear about divination is satanic or anti-Christian, well, no, it was actually prescribed if you look up Urim and Thummim in the Bible, it really explains that, and they were used for making decisions, but it really doesn't go into detail of how. And so a lot of that is left to Talmudic interpretation, but it's kind of neat that this was a mechanism that was allowed to kind of it's the equivalent of flipping a coin, but it's a little bit more divine, a little bit more inspired. So I think it's fascinating. There's a lot of research I want to do in diving into how Urim and Thummim was used throughout history.
Well, to your point, like I said, I spent a really long time looking up what exactly they meant or what was even written on them, and nobody can decide. No two sources agree on what exactly they were, just that they were identical. They were different colored, normally white or black, because I think that's all the Bible says about them, or the Old Testament. And but yeah, if you search on YouTube, there are some really interesting stories about how they could possibly have been used. And like that, the one about incandescing I saw, it was a lecture from a rabbi, and he was talking about how the one would glow and heat up, and that's the one that they would pull out, and that would be the answer from God. And so I found that a little bit interesting to the point where I mentioned it. But yep. And next. So again, just wrapping it all up, we have the symbol of the past high priest. So for Royal Arch Masons, it's the breastplate. In some cases, it's the working tools, which we won't get into. The inscription, "Holiness to the Lord," King James Version. And if we hit the slide one more time and get into the bumper sticker that you see, most oftentimes you will see 3 triangles with the past high priest symbol and the tetragrammaton, and that's normally what you'll see on people's bumpers as they're pulling into Royal Arch meeting. But again, a lot of symbolism to unpack there that we won't get into today. But again, I just wanted to go over where these symbols came from, why they're important to Royal Arch Masons at least, and why they have a whole bunch of symbolism that, again, you could unpack for hours and hours and days and days. And those are my references, because I'm OCD about citing stuff, so you can totally share that. And again, like John said, this is on the Grand Chapter of Virginia website, and there's a bunch of education on there, great papers. So for your Blue Lodges or your Royal Arch chapters, feel free to take a look.
Excellent. They're not in MLA format, but we'll allow it.
Also, Wikipedia is not a credible source.
You're right, but everything that Wikipedia says is sourced, so.
Ooh.
Take
It's
that.
very meta.
Take that, academic.
Yeah, there's only a couple places that don't use Wikipedia as a credible source, and even the government on occasion uses Wikipedia as a source.
Good story.
Intellipedia.
Well, Joe, that was fantastic. Thank you for putting that together. It was very visual, so thank you for putting the PowerPoint deck together. If you are listening to this podcast version, well, you got a great wealth of information and with specific biblical references. Head on over to see pictures of the High Priest Regalia. Anything else you want to add or close on that specific topic? Anything else that people who may want to look for more information where they might want to go?
Well, if you are a Blue Lodge Mason, go join Royal Arch. There is a lot of cool stuff there. I wish Mike was on there because we talk about this all the time. It really is. You guys all know I'm a joiner. I like to join things, but it really is my favorite appendant body in Masonry. There's so much stuff there, and it really ties everything together that you learn in the Blue Lodge, and it's a great capstone, no pun intended, to that whole story. But Yeah, there is. I think a lot of the references ultimately point to me to, I think it's the Grand Chapter of Alberta. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that website. They have an amazing amount of papers and research on Royal Arch and the High Priest. So go Canada.
Good stuff. I think it's about that time then to start wrapping up for final thoughts and shameless plugs. Let's start with Robert Johnson for his final thoughts on this topic.
All right. So, of course, thanks to Joe for coming on to do this. PowerPoint is, I love visuals with my presentations. And thanks to Joe for not just putting up words and reading them on the screen. So, A plus. I love the symbolism of the Royal Arch. It is so in different areas of the country, in different areas of the world, the York Rite is sometimes broken up, and I guess in Virginia it's not, and that kind of blew my mind when I figured that out. But here in Illinois, you know, we have the Cryptic Council and the Royal Arch chapter, culminating in the 7th, and later on in the 9th or 10th degree if you happen to get it. But for us here, the degrees in the Royal Arch chapter are what Joe said. They really tie it all together. And I didn't have enough time to pull together a Big Lebowski meme with the rug and say that it ties it all together. But it is fantastic system of degrees. One of the things that I love about it in particular is the garments of the high priest in relation to why they are to be used. I love the conspiracy. I love the wild postulations that are given regarding the Ark of the Covenant and what it really was or what it could have been, which is where my question really came from. Could guilt have meant something else and protect him from some sort of, you know, electrical discharge or something? I don't know. But anyway, it's a great book on that if you ever want to read it. It's called The Sign and the Seal, I think. Or, I don't know, it's by Graham Hancock. He wrote it back in the 90s. Anyway, check that out. Really enjoyed it. Huge thanks to Joe for coming on. And, yep, I'll see you guys at Esotericon with Joe.
Boom, there you go.
And Masonicon with Joe.
Oh, yeah. I'll be at Masonicon too. Well, I'll be at Masonicon.
Let's get around. So,
yeah.
I guess that's your segue, Joe. Why don't you go ahead and plug a certain event coming up this June?
Alrighty. Well, first let's throw a quick shout out to Masonicon. Awesome. Love those guys. So much so that I became a member, I think same time as Robert, right? Yeah, for those who have not heard, we're putting on a Masonic conference here in Manassas, Virginia in June. And it is called the Mid-Atlantic Esotericon. We're going to have speakers like P.D. Newman, Jamie Lamb, Don McAndrews, John Ruark, Robert Johnson. Who else is going to be there? Greg Kaminsky. Well, Jason will be there, but he will not be speaking. He's bouncing. And I'm forgetting someone. Help me out. I'll feel bad. Who?
Drawing a blank.
Frodero, maybe?
Frodero, yes.
Frodero, I was screaming
Thank
it into
you.
the mic and I was muted.
So it's going to be an all-day esoteric conference. It's going to have both tiled and untiled sessions, catered lunch. We're going to have a brew night the night before. And we just posted this publicly a couple of days ago for those that stay in the Sunday. There's going to be a private tour of the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. So it is going to be what I hope will be a fantastic event. And before I shut up, I just want to say, guys, thank you so much for having me. I've been geeking out the entire time that I've been here talking. So thank you so much for the honor of joining you guys tonight. Really appreciated it.
Thank you very much, Joe. We really do appreciate it. One last thing back to you, Joe. How would someone find Esotericon to buy tickets?
Yes. So you can go to, we have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/MA, that's Mike Alpha Esotericon. Or you can buy tickets at tinyurl.com /MA Esotericon. And hopefully somebody will put that in the YouTube page because I can't do two things at the same time.
Will do. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. All right. Jason Richards.
All right, great show, Joe. Thanks so much for coming on. It's exciting to hear about just everything related to Royal Arch, because I know that's a big passion of yours from a research standpoint. So thanks for sharing that knowledge with us tonight. Everybody, thanks so much for watching. We love tuning in with you week after week and spending time with you in the Patreon group as well as on the TMR YouTube chat. So keep it up. We're going to keep coming to you every Thursday night. So thanks so much for watching. I hope to get to see you at one of a number of Masonic events coming up this year, whether it be Esotericon, Masonicon, perhaps Camp Masonry. So just come up and say hi. I'd love to meet you and spend some time with you. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much. You know, the one Masonic question of the day I posted in my group chat at work for my fellow brothers at work was, what Masonic research paper are you working on right now? Right? Because that's assuming that everyone is, as they should be, because Masonic education is the reason we are Masons, not to just join a social club. And the advice I keep giving people is at least pick one big topic a year so that you can do good research, can deliver it, and then milk that for a little while. And so if Joe hadn't taken upon himself to create this Masonic education piece, I wouldn't have stumbled upon it and then reached out to him to have him on TMR and share that knowledge and education with all of you. And so
what paper are you working on right now, John?
I'm working on my Esotericon presentation and paper. So that's the one that I'm going to be building this year.
Good answer.
Yes. And hopefully Joe will be releasing my bio and paper topic shortly after this show.
Very shortly.
Nice. I'm gonna leave you in suspense.
It's so secret, honestly, that even the Patreons who usually get a heads up on everything, even I don't know yet.
I know what it is.
Well, that's because you jerks talk on the phone every day.
We spend a lot of time together. I also, by the way, have a brand new program that I am working on that will hopefully be unveiled sometime in August.
Even I don't know what this is, or do I? I get it.
Mike Hambrecht knows what it is, but I don't think you know yet. It'll be good.
Man, it's like masonry. It's like secrets upon secrets. Okay. And the last thing I want to add is a huge shout out to our super chats tonight. Of course, Simba on Fire, the cop, not the fireman, but the cop, is that for the third week in a row has given us some love in the super chat. So he noted that officially it points out or you're weird. So make that duly noted.
And to our good friend Lucas Hess as well. Lucas has been active on the super chat. So
yes.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, we're rooting for you with your petition into your lodge. So hope to get to call you brother soon.
I signed Lucas's petition.
What?
That's right.
And then finally, Rob Mullen, we'll have to give a shout out to him as well, just to try to figure out how the button works. You figured it out, and you got a shout out on the show. So thank you very much.
Now, once more with feeling.
Yeah. We'll have to test it out a couple more times. That'd be great.
17 times.
We do appreciate it. And, Masonic education is why we do this. Again, thank you for the topic. Thank you for the research, Joe. And we'll see you all next week for great Masonic content every week. Thank you very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.